Some of you may remember that I was the speaker at the Centennial held downtown in the Hilton. It was a great event. How many people were there? Quite a few. How many people, now, be honest, remember anything I said? Okay, well, in that case, I won't just, I brought the one that I used then, thinking if nobody remembered, I could just go back and do it. But I'll use the one I wrote for tonight. So anyway, it's nice to be back. Anybody who wants to really understand the details and any sort of in-depth dynamic of the Women's City Club needs to make sure that you read Andrea Kornbluth's Lighting the Way and Rachel Powell's Lighting the Fire. That's where those two authors really get into a lot of the details. I am not going to try in 15 minutes to do what they do in 2 volumes. I'm not going to beat that kind of story out. My goal tonight is very similar to what I did 10 years ago, which was to try to put the Women's City Club into a larger context with some observations about, one observation about sort of what I've learned in it through a strange path that puts the Women's City Club in a little bit different light locally, but then also to talk about the Women's City Club as part of a larger national process that has gone on through American history, but is taking some strange turns recently. So that's sort of where I'm headed with this. So one of the things that happened last November was that I was asked, someone approached me about writing the history of the Queen City Club, the club down at 4th and Broadway. It was celebrating its 150th anniversary, and a very different sort of organization than this one, on many different levels. But one of the things that I came to realize in writing that club moved from its original location at 7th and Elm. In 1927, it moved to 4th and Broadway. And in trying to understand the reason for the move and why they ended up moving there, something really became clear to me, that there had been a whole clustering of various clubs on East 4th Street. Some of them right around what we call Lytle Park and what was developing, going through a number of different changes, becoming Lytle Park. That included a number of the women's clubs that flourished in Cincinnati. There were various women's suffrage clubs. There were professional women's groups relating to people women in advertising, women in nursing, women in journalism. There were religiously identified clubs that related to both Catholics, Protestants, and Jewish women. All of those were sort of thriving in the late 19th, early 20th century. And a number of those clustered on East 4th Street, including the Women's City Club. Women's City Club created a clubhouse at 428 4th Street that included, at the time, it was supposedly for 400 members, had an auditorium for programs. It had meeting rooms, dining rooms, lounges, all those sorts of things. There was also just down the street, the Cincinnati Business Women's Club. It was smaller, but it was in that literally in the same block. There was also the Cincinnati Catholic Women's Association, which had 62 lodging rooms where people could stay overnight, either for one night or for a longer period of time. And there was obviously the Literary Club, which is still there. So there's these clubs clustered around Lytle. And then there were these other two clubs that move into that same area, but just west of that, being the Queen City Club at 4th and Broadway, and then right across the street, right across Broadway, not across 4th, right across Broadway, was the University Club. The Queen City Club and the University Club in an earlier format had both been up on 7th Street near Elm. They had just been a couple of addresses. They weren't right next to each other like they are now. But what was attracting all of these clubs to that area? Well, one, I think, was Lytle Park was increasingly becoming the most pleasant and sort of the green center of the old basin. Because by that time, people were moving out of the basin onto the hilltop suburbs. We were creating what I call the second city of hilltop suburbs, and people needed a place to cluster, and that Lytle Park was attracted to them. For these two other clubs that were just a little bit west, they were sort of acting like a hinge between the club district and 4th Street, which between 1900 and 1913 was totally transformed into the financial district. And all of the city's original skyscrapers and large business buildings, which defined the second city in the basin, in other words, defined the downtown. We begin to use that term as the downtown because people were no longer living there. So they wanted to be sort of at this area that connected the club district and the financial district. Now, all of those clubs had their own characters and their own personalities. One of the things about the Women's City Club that strikes me is that it's fundamentally different than any of those other clubs. It was more diverse right from the beginning, and you can see it in the 6 women who were the initial leadership. The membership was age-wise between 25 and 46 among those leadership people, religiously, Protestant, Catholic, Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish members of the club, and educationally, women with college degrees and graduate degrees. So it was much more diverse. Now, if you go over to the Queen City Club, first off, there were no women. Let's be clear about that until the late 1980s. And if you want to know why women began to become members at the same time African Americans became members, it was because of Procter & Gamble. The tradition was that Procter & Gamble, when people reached a certain level of the company, they bought memberships for people at that level. As they diversified their leadership with women and African Americans, and suddenly they weren't welcome at the Queen City Club, the leadership of Procter & Gamble made it clear, you're going to change or we're out of here. By the way, at the same time, food had gotten bad. And the CEO, Smale, made it clear that he wasn't going to go eat there anymore if the food didn't improve. So we can sometimes miss the importance of certain organizations. We think of them only as business organizations or what they do formally in society or in politics. But a company like P&G has had a transformative effect in lots of areas. But even more important than that, the Women's City Club embraced a common purpose as a self-conscious activist organization from the beginning. It went far beyond the model of the social business clubs that stress social relationships. None of these other clubs had that sort of group identification. The people who belong to the Queen City Club, the CEO types, the top social types, They saw themselves coming together and believed that they had the right and the duty to direct the future of the city. But the club as the club didn't have that view. It was just the place where people came to meet and talk about what they wanted to have happen. But with the Women's City Club, there was a very different, clear purpose. And people, the new officers, just promised to uphold that Constitution. If you go back to the 1915 Constitution, the purpose of this organization is to establish a broad acquaintance among the women through the common aim of service to their city, to provide a central meeting place where members may meet informally and establish an open forum for the discussion of all ideas of civic import. Now, this is very much outwardly looking as an organization, not just we think that individual members will be active in the larger community, but the group itself will be, the organization will be active. In one sense, the Women's City Club, in fact, all of the clubs I've mentioned, the women's clubs, the religious clubs, all of these, were all part of the long tradition in the United States, going back into the colonial period, but certainly in the United States, of forming organizations of all different types, which was really called out by Alexis de Tocqueville. Anyone who has not read Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, it's your assignment. It's what I give my kids. It's what I give as a gift. It is an absolute must. And de Tocqueville wrote, after his trip to America in the early 1830s, he said, Americans of all ages, all conditions, all minds constantly unite. Not only do they have commercial and industrial associations, but they also have 1,000 other kinds: religious, moral, grave, feudal, very general and very particular, immense and very small. Americans are use associations to give all kinds of festivals, to found seminaries, to build inns, to raise churches, to distribute books, to send missionaries to the antipodes. In the manner that they create hospitals, prisons, and schools. There has been this long tradition of civic association, and this is really, when we talk about American democracy, in my mind, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking just about elections and partisan politics. We're talking about a mindset that's about grassroots people cooperating together and really doing something about the daily life and the way people live. That didn't ever become clear to me. I mean, I read it. I read about this as a student or as an early teacher, a high school teacher or college teacher. Didn't come home to me, though, until 1991, when I was asked to go with a sister city delegation as a reporter for Channel 12, and we went to Kharkiv. Now, this is 3 months, they were still part of the Soviet Union. This is 3 months before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we had lots of discussions about democracy was on everybody's mind. And we used the same language, but they really saw it related to elections. And trying to get them to see bigger things, see the more underlying cooperative nature of society was really difficult. So you go into apartment buildings, which you could go up 5 floors and never see a light because all the lights had been unscrewed. Because if you put them out there, people took them. You got into people's individual apartments, and they were wonderful, and they were welcoming, and they were also, but they didn't know how to collaborate with each other. They didn't have that kind of rooted association building. And that's really what I realized was that was what was really important about American society and American democracy in a broader sense. So the intentionality of commitment to understand the social and political forces and being active agents of change sets the Women's City Club apart right from the beginning. and your breadth of interest reflected in the public presentations, papers, studies, study groups, reports. You can look at all of that stuff that's been gathered in those 2 books about the Women's City Club. It goes across all sorts of topics. Municipal political reform, the Charter Committee back in the 1920s, and collaboration and cooperation. The urban planning, public school finance, desegregation, racism, civil rights, housing, women's rights, feminism. All of these things keep coming up. And what I find interesting that is, as a group, you've had such a broad area of many interests that lots of things got studied, talked about, acted on, but then maybe put aside only to be come back to 2 decades later and picked up in a slightly different context. For most organizations, if you talk to organizational consultants, they will tell you the first thing you have to do is have a very focused, clear purpose. We got to narrow our focus. Well, I would suggest that Women's City Club has survived for 110 years because it hasn't had a clear focus other than understanding the nature of our society and being active in it. You've had a broad interest. You haven't depended on one thing and only one thing to pursue, and I think that's really important. 10 years ago, one of the things I raised in my centennial talk, and I want to raise it again here, is that discussion I just sort of laid out about growing out of the American instinct to form associations and groups and be active. Alexis de Tocqueville's sort of view of American democracy, that has been changing. And it's been changing for quite a while, probably since about 1965. If you're familiar with Robert Putnam,
yes.
Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, but also his more recent work, something begins to turn in the mid-1960s. And this sort of collective activity of people doing things together, very consciously, like the Women's City Club, and very unconsciously, like bowling leagues. But the point is, his image, if you don't know Bowling Alone, is that in 2000, more people bowled in the United States than had ever bowled before. But they didn't bowl in leagues, they bowled by themselves. It was a sport. Bowling leagues is when people came together and they ended up talking about whatever was happening in their community, however they defined their community. And that's some sort of fundamental a sort of change and a shift from that communitarian view to a more and more individualistic view. And that affects all sorts of things. It affects how we think of leadership. Is leadership a singular effort by a great person who knows how to break through? Or is leadership something a group like the Women's City Club can steer over a period of time? Is it a collective responsibility? And that has been weakened and problematic at least since the mid-60s, I think, if you accept Putnam's analysis, which I do. But that older view of communitarian responsibility created certain sort of phrases in American life that probably most of us have grown up with. All politics are local. All politics are local. Cities and states are the laboratories of democracy and civic innovation. I think most of us, there are some young people here, but most of us are of an age where those sorts of things were truisms. In the last 10 years, that has been called into question, and I would suggest literally turned on its head. As articulated, whether it's articulated in the Project 2025 and or reflected in the first 5 months of the second Trump administration, local action, local innovation are no longer in favor. Change is top down, and the myriad of local institutions, city governments, public and private universities, libraries, not-for-profit social service agencies, cultural institutions, museums, theaters, symphonies, all of these are being squeezed right now to conform to a narrower and narrower view of what it means to be American and how we should be moving into the future. In my mind, this is a direct attack on American democracy, not just in a constitutional sort of way, and that's what I think mostly gets focused on. It's deeper than that. It's the democracy that de Tocqueville talked about and helped us understand, the legitimacy of community organizations. And organizations like the Women's City Club, the goal is to marginalize groups like this, to take you out of the center, to take you away from being the agents of change. So the question at 110, which wasn't clear at 100, to me is, what will the Women's City Club do to respond to this challenge? And secondly, where will you find collaborators? It's a difficult, I think, where you are at the Centennial and where you are at 110 are very different positions, as is all of our society. So anyway, just a few thoughts. As I said, I started out as a high school teacher, so all questions are welcome. And if you don't ask me a question, one of two things have happened. Either I've lost you and you've gone to sleep, or you're plotting against me. I've had both of those things happen in the classroom. Sophomores. There was a reason I never taught sophomores after my first year. Once I became department chair in my second year, I made sure I never taught sophomores again. So anyway, because they do plot against you. So anybody have questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I just wonder, look a little bit more in the future, Dan. Do you think that the crisis we're going through now might stimulate going back to collaborative work amongst citizens?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, by personality, whatever. Yeah. I just can't believe when I see and travel around Cincinnati and talk to groups and whatever, and it doesn't have to be, I'm much more poignant tonight than I've ever been about this particular situation. But I don't see people buying it. I see people being the same as they were 6 years ago or 6 months ago or whatever. They still care about certain things. So, you know, I overheard a conversation earlier tonight about the budget and the tuition scholarships that you give to women. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to be squelched by a lot of universities. You know, people are taking their money back from universities where the universities will give it to them. And they're saying, we'll put it someplace else if you're not going to use it for what we give. So I think there's still resistance out there. I think people will find it again. So I don't, but only if we act. Only if we act.
I was just traveling in Iceland, where my ancestors came from. And as you were talking, I was thinking about cell phones and their role in creating isolation. Because when I went to Iceland before, it was different. This time, they were ubiquitous. And I'm wondering, as you're talking about the withdrawal into the individual, have you factored in the role of social media and the cell phone?
Well, yeah, but not in 15 minutes, but yes, I think about it a lot. Although Pat and I, when we were talking, we haven't seen each other for 3 or 4 years, but we're connected on Facebook.
Okay.
And she keeps in touch. She keeps aware. I think there are positive things that do come out of it.
Okay.
If you look at the end of Putman's book, when Putman released Bowling in America, Bowling Alone, he came to Cincinnati to give a speech, and I ended up being able to interview him for an hour. And we talked about this, but this was in 2000. So, the whole social media thing was almost a myth.
Right.
It was sort of out there. He had some hope that that would replace some things. We also see how it can destroy other things. So I think it's complicated.
So the picture's not-
The reality is, though, it's not going away. So we've got to figure out how to deal with it. It's not going to go away.
So use the cell phone to revive and build the old communities,
Yep.
basically. Okay.
If we can figure out how to do that. Yes, question.
Kind of a statement is much of a question. You said that we're being squeezed, we're being marginalized, but I wonder if what Women's City Club and other groups like us that are broad-based might see is that our membership will actually grow because people who feel squeezed and marginalized are going to be seeking out places, like we'll become I hate to say sanctuary, but the haven, the place for like-minded people.
Well.
So maybe, even though it feels like we're all going to hell in a handbasket, maybe Women's City Club will actually benefit from that in a way that we will attract more people and have a bigger voice because we have more people.
Well, I think that's possible. The last time I was in this room was not for Women's City Club, but for the Immigrant Coalition.
Oh, yeah.
Back in January, just before the inauguration, where nobody quite knew what was going to happen. People are looking for ways to connect.
Yes.
Now, can your organization provide some of that? Is it new organizations that will emerge that will provide that? I don't know. I do believe that we're still, most of us are still Americans who believe in collaborative action. I think one of the questions I think about all the time, and with David here, David was a frequent guest on both Newsmakers and on Cincinnati Edition. The question I pose to myself is, could I even do that show anymore? I used to love having Alex Triantafilo and Tim Burke.
Right.
And I remember, we would take a commercial break, and I always paid attention to what the young people who were running camera said. And we would have we'd have politicians who were coming from different points of view. And after the show, a lot of these young people would say, well, we went to the commercial break and they seemed to actually like each other. And I said, well, of course they did. They believe that politics, not partisanship, but politics is a meaningful and purposeful way to live your life. Yeah. Aristotle said, you're not fully human until you enter the public space and are a politician. So, and that means small p politician. Doesn't mean Republican or Democrat. But today, we've driven each other apart because we run a negative political society where dividing people is more important than uniting people. Is this a temporary thing that we will eventually get over? We will find ways out of this? Or, is there some future? That's what, the book where this essay on Women's City Club is this book, which will be for sale afterwards, called For Cincinnati's. It's sort of where I've come after 50 years of thinking about Cincinnati. The title essay is For Cincinnati's. This book is dedicated to my two grandchildren. They're the people who are going to build the For Cincinnati, not me. I'm 79 years old. I'm not, it's not me. I'm not, I can prod, but I can't lead at this stage. So, I'm very much, and those of you who know me know I'm very tied to my granddaughter, who's 12 years old. And of course, like all grandparents, she's unbelievable and wonderful. But, there's a part of that I really count on. I count that I have a grandson who just graduated from Walnut and is headed to Columbia. So an interesting place to end up.
Yes.
So, somehow, we're not going to just cease, but it could be ugly, and it may not be smooth, and it may not be likable for a while. So, other questions? Yes. And you cut me off whenever you want.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Dan. It's fantastic because, history is wonderful to hear again. And I have to say, before you started talking, we were talking about Robert Putnam at this table. So
Very good. That's
yeah,
good table.
We're on it. And the other thing I just want to say is, having been to Harkeep also, and I had these same experiences way back then. So these are all resonant points. But what's really striking me right now is thinking about our times. You mentioned Project 2025. And many of us participated in the No Kings March recently. Huge turnout of people. So from gatherings like this, when there's associations where people are either members or listening to lectures, but we're associating in smaller units, and these big turnouts, there's a big gap in there. And I guess what I'm interested in is your thoughts or anyone's thoughts about collaboration, how we can build collaboration, how we can build more cohesion in smaller units, smaller associations, but link into this really rising energy that is happening in opposition to what people feel is the destruction of our society and our democracy.
And I think people have been trying to do this for a decade. If you go back to the reaction after Charlottesville, there was a whole outgrowth of people trying to find the ways to bring people together who come from different parts of society and talk with each other and act together. And that's still there. There's a lot of, it's there. I keep waiting for something that so shocks people that they say, my gosh, we got to really do something here. And I don't,
I can't imagine. We've had so many shocking things.
I know. I mean, yeah, we could get into that. I mean, I've got my own list of things that I can't believe wasn't the end of the road, but it hasn't been. So what's that tell us about us as a nation?
Just to refine the question a little bit more, because this is the Women's City Club, and you're celebrating and reminding us of the history of this organization and its potential. And I'm also thinking like the Cincinnati Harkeep Sister City project, which got reactivated because of the war. It was kind of very, not much happening.
Right.
And it is alive again. So I guess I'm wondering in this organization what you or others might see as potential at this point in time to reactivate or to be a leader because of the history, the weight and the...
I'm going to punt on that because you're the members. You're the people who know the organization. You're the ones who showed up tonight because you care about this organization. You're the ones who are going to figure out what this organization can do. What's going to be the 120th or 125th anniversary celebration? And what will they say about what you've done in the last, since the centennial? I think that's really important. What legacy do you want to leave? Yeah.
Well, I am really concerned about the Constitution right now.
I'm sorry, the what?
The Constitution that under assault.
Remember that? Yeah.
I mean, it's really serious. So
It is very
it's being
serious.
Ignored, basically. And I thought you had to, if you to change amendments, you had to go through a process. You couldn't just say you're not going to do it anymore. So, is that true? I mean, can people group together to prevent this? Right now, there are people grouping together to change to make sure that these bad things happen.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of determination, of stick-to-itiveness, of people who have that vision. I'm trained as a colonial early national historian. Nobody's asked me about that for 55 years. But I did my graduate work at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. So, I think people should go back and read the Federalist Papers, not just the Constitution. They should read the Federalist Papers, which explains what the Constitution is about. They need to get back in touch with those basic documents and ideas, and to see what's happening at the University of Virginia, Mr. Jefferson's university, is shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And if you have, when I entered graduate school, I taught high school for 4 years, then went to graduate school. It was sort of an unofficial assignment to go to Monticello, because at that time, everybody knew Jefferson and Sally Hemings had a relationship, except the leadership of Virginia. And you would go to Monticello and take the tour. They never used the word slave, by the way. Yeah. They were only servants. So where were the slaves? Where did they live? The servants lived, Mulberry Road. And then the giant question was, you waited till you got to the bedroom, and then you said, now, did Sally Hemings sleep here every night? Or just occasionally? And then they'd fall into a puddle on the floor. Well, you go there now, there's an exhibit to Sally Hemings. Yeah. There's a discussion about the enslaved people who lived on Mulberry Row. Yeah. They have embraced the descendants, the mixed race descendants of Jefferson, and they're talking about it out front and open, and it's not a federal site. They can do it because it's a private site. Now, they may go after grant money for certain specific things, but that may be a problem. But it's not part of the Park Service. Yeah. So anyway, I would say it's up to you. People
even the Supreme Court just said that the lower courts can't issue injunctions against some of this.
That's a complicated question. That's a complicated question, though. That isn't always the idea of district courts issuing national injunctions. Hasn't always been understood as the role of the district court. So there's a legitimate question in that. What's behind that question is even more important: birthright citizenship. Right. And if we ignore the 14th Amendment, that's unbelievable. I refuse to believe, it's an argument between my son and I refuse to believe that the court will follow through and allow for doing away with birthright citizenship. I just can't believe it. But I don't know. He thinks I'm a fool. By the way, anybody who is interested in this book or my latest book, Crossing Borders, Expanding Boundaries, A White Soldier's Experience of the Segregated World War II Army, which is about my father's experience. It ended up being a liberator at Dachau and a white officer.
With you? There's copies with you?
I've got copies. Have books, will travel.
Yes.
So thank you very much.